Boy, there's not really a lot going on in the world of politics these days, is there?
Let's think of something, Rob. We can think of something.
We'll find something to talk about. It was funny. We start the podcast off that way. Senator Kevin Cramer is my guest. It's been a couple of weeks since we've spoken. Your guy Jake Wilkins, your communications guy, who I sort of set up these interviews with. He was teasing me this morning via text message when he was confirming the interview, saying, "Do you need any help finding topics?" Ha ha ha. Yeah, no, Jake. I feel like we're gonna be okay.
I think so.
So national election, the presidential stuff. We're gonna talk about that. Let's talk about what is a surprise. I honestly did not expect the Republicans to hold on to the Senate, and it sure looks at this point like that's gonna happen. What are your thoughts on that, Kevin?
Well, it does look like it's going to happen, Rob, but I hesitate just slightly because, of course, there are these two Senate races in Georgia, which people may not be familiar with, but we have a special election in Georgia and of course, the regularly scheduled general election in Georgia. And Georgia has this peculiar law that requires, in the general election, requires the winner to get 50% plus one, and 49.9% is not enough. And so short of getting 50% plus one, it goes to a runoff on January 5th. It appears both races will be, both senators are going to have to run for re-election on January 5th again. And so short of that, there's a 50-50 Senate. I mean, I shouldn't say it's 50-48 or whatever the case might be, 48-48, and the determination will be, the majority will be determined by the Senate in Georgia. Now, we only need one of those two to be the majority, we being Republicans. We'd like to get both of them, obviously. So I think you're right. I think we at the worst we could do is we have a tie, but with a possible Vice President, Kamala Harris, Republicans would need to win one of those Georgia seats, hopefully both of them.
That's kind of as good as a Democratic majority with the vice president being a Democrat, if that is indeed the case.
It is.
Now you saying that, I mean, that could be the case. Well, we're going to get into that. I want to talk about these Senate races. And just before I came on air, it looked like they called the race, the Arizona Senate race, for Mark Kelly over Martha McSally, who was the Republican. So it looks like they have a pickup there. And the House is really where Republicans were surprising. And I guess yesterday, Democrats had a not so fun conference call that was being live tweeted as they were holding it. I've done that a few times I've had legislators leaking me stuff from Bismarck as meetings are going on. That's kind of fun if you're a member of the news media.
Sure.
But there's a lot of Democrats that are upset. I know some of the more moderate members of the Democratic caucus are saying, can we stop talking about socialism? Can we stop talking about defunding the police? Can we stop talking about defunding fracking? This stuff is killing us. But the squad, the quote unquote squad, the sort of left wing, they were all safe, right? They were all fine.
Right.
In fact, it looks like they added a member, or they expanded their ranks a little bit, even though the overall Democratic caucus shrunk a little bit. But do you really think that's what it was? Was it Democrats talking about socialism and defunding the police and banning fracking and all those things? Is that what killed them in some of these House races?
I don't think there's any question, Rob. We often complain about Nancy Pelosi as Republicans, but the reality is she is the gift that keeps on giving in the Senate. And she's got a very difficult job, or in the House, I'm sorry, difficult job. I've watched struggle with the minority of their majority. Her two groups within her majority. Well, she really has three or four. She has the Progressive Caucus, and she has moderates. She also has the Black Caucus. The AOC crowd is progressive plus, I guess you could say, the squad. But any small group of House members in the majority can control the majority by virtue of the speakership, because the speaker needs a majority of the sitting members in order to become speaker. You need a majority to become speaker. And so if that majority, if you're 10 short, so let's just say this, you need 217 votes. If you have 227 Democrats in your caucus, but 11 of them decide they're voting for Donald Duck for speaker, or they say they want to vote for, they wouldn't vote for a Republican, but if that happens, and we had that happen in when we were in charge of the House with John Boehner and Paul Ryan, They control whether you become speaker or not. And by virtue of being a small minority, but large enough to stop you from getting the majority, they have leverage. That's what you're experiencing. And I don't blame the moderates for being upset. Right next door to North Dakota in the 7th District of Minnesota, Colin Peterson didn't just lose, he lost big. And I saw that one coming for 2 years if he was going to run again. And there's no question that this defund the police movement, he didn't even vote for impeachment, by the way. He voted against impeachment, and he still lost at the hands, really, of Nancy Pelosi.
Well, there comes a point, and I think it's a lot of what's happened to Democrats here in North Dakota, and a lot of it's local issues as well. But there comes a point where Democrats could say, well, I'm not like my national counterparts. I vote very differently on the important issues. I'm with you. And you could still say, well, you're still a vote for Nancy Pelosi to be speaker. Like you're still giving the majority. Although that is kind of an interesting thing about the speakership is it doesn't just automatically go to the majority party. The minority members of the House also get to vote for who's speaker. And
that's right.
It's their votes count too. And so you really have to unite the majority caucus behind a speaker. If you split the majority caucus, then there's a point at which, well, okay, now you're giving the minority some say in this. And it's kind of an interesting dynamic, but certainly that's everything that's going on nationally. We're watching a lot of these vote counts unfold. I know you've been very critical of Fox News for calling Arizona so early. And listen, however Arizona turns out, that Fox News call was way too early.
Way too early.
And so I thought that was unfortunate. I think it's unfortunate that the news media was cutting away from President Trump's remarks last night. I don't think I don't like this new development, whether it's social media, whether it's television news or reporter, where we're going to protect the public from the things that are going on. Like what Mr. Trump has to say or not, it's news. He's saying it. He's still the president of the United States. We ought to be able to see it. I don't think we need to be protected from the things our politicians say. Now, all that being said, are you feeling good about some of the things President Trump is saying right now? Because I don't. I don't understand why he's saying it. I don't even understand why he's saying it from his perspective. I don't see how this helps him. You're listening to this stuff, Kevin. Are you okay with it?
Well, in terms of how it helps him, I think you're right. I don't think it helps him. I will say this, Robin, I know people get frustrated with my defense, but Donald Trump has lived as the president of the United States for over 4 years with narrative that included impeachment was appropriate, that he's illegitimate, absolutely trying to take him down for over 4 years. And then they crazy suppression polling, and I'm sorry, you cannot call it anything but that. When they come out with these media polls showing him losing by 17 points in one state, losing by 8, 10, 12 points in Florida, only to have him win these states at the end of the day.
This election was
what is the purpose of that?
This election was almost an extinction level event for political polling. I mean, it was not. At least the public, at least the public facing polling. I think it can be effective,
but it's all part of my same point, and that is I don't blame Donald Trump for his level of frustration. And even if he says it inarticulately or ineloquently or whatever we might say, I'm tired of the last 4 years. In fact, I told Maggie Haberman yesterday from the New York Times, who I talked to a lot, I said, I am so tired of you always asking me if I agree, if I'm concerned about what Donald Trump said. I said, when are you going to ask Chris Coons or some Democratic senator if they're concerned about the fact that their presidential nominee and maybe President-elect Joe Biden can't finish a sentence or can't tell his wife from his daughter or can't remember who the president is or what town he's in. I said, I hope every single day when in a Biden-Harris administration, if there is one, that you people, instead of asking me if I'm concerned about Donald Trump, are going to ask Democrats if they're concerned about their president who can't finish a thought out loud. So I'm completely sympathetic with where the president is in his frustrations. I mean, how about the fact that a Pennsylvania court changed state law to allow 3 extra days of vote counting? I mean, who's ever heard of such a thing? That our Constitution, by the way, doesn't allow.
Well, you mean vote casting, I think, not vote counting, per se.
Well, actually, there are states that have actually changed the fact that the signature or the timestamp, the date stamp on the absentee ballot or the mail-in ballot isn't even relevant.
Yeah.
A smudge is adequate. And then who's ever heard of ballot curing, by the way? There's a new term for you, ballot curing.
Yeah.
In case, in Pennsylvania, for example, 1,600 votes come in that are wrong. And so they get to call the people that sent them in and said, didn't you mean this? Really? Your signature doesn't match. Who is this? No, you throw those votes out. But now they allow, quote, curing of the ballots. And Rob, listen, I get that we're in a special circumstance with the pandemic and all that. But remember, one of the greatest characteristics of Donald Trump is he sees things way before they happen. It frustrates a lot of people because he's always ahead of them. He saw this moment happening. And you can't help but be suspicious when all of a sudden, Florida, who can count all their votes, by the way, on Election Day, a bigger state than some of these others, certainly much bigger than the ones that are in question right now. These liberal places like Philadelphia and Detroit and Atlanta and Milwaukee can't get their votes counted for several days, and so all the ones that come in, and I know they're from Democratic strongholds and all of that stuff, but he called this. He knew this 6 months ago that this would be a problem if we expanded the vote by mail thing. And let's not also forget, by the way, that the reason we don't have another COVID relief package is because Nancy Pelosi attached to their bills all the time universal unsolicited vote by mail and ballot harvesting. That's the other thing. Let's not forget ballot harvesting. Who ever heard of that before? She wanted that to be allowed nationally and take away states' rights to prevent that. And she also would have required or prohibited states from requiring identification to vote. He has every reason in the world to be suspicious of what's going on. And to add to that, and here's where North Dakota is so special, Rob, in some of these states, including in Pennsylvania, not only do they not allow conservatives in, which their state requires, conservatives in to watch the vote counting, but when they did, they made them stand several feet away, 30 feet, in some cases 50, 100 feet, put up, paper over the windows so that observers couldn't see what's going on. They literally ordered these things against state law. So as we live in North Dakota, where we are have the brightest sunshine, and that's a great tribute to our culture and to our state, and certainly our media enjoys that. We ought to have the same thing in places like Atlanta, Georgia, and Milwaukee.
Although there haven't been a lot of close elections in North Dakota lately, at least certainly not at the statewide level. But
no, that's for sure.
But it would, and I do like our process. We have a good one, even without voter registration. We do it. I think we do it very well.
You're right.
I want to circle back because I know you're very frustrated about being asked about President Trump and some of the things he's been saying. He's the leader of the free world. He's in what is one of our most important political offices. And I say that because I'm a good federalist and I recognize the importance of governors and everything else. But one of our most important offices. He is the head of our national government. For him to say these things in the way he's saying them, in the tinderbox environment that we are, I feel like there's a way to advocate for all the problems that you're talking about without saying some of the things that he's saying. Now, and listen, I mean, these are some of the other, President Trump supporters. Governor Chris Christie was on ABC News last night. This is a quote. He says, "I talked tonight not as a former governor, but as a former U.S. attorney. There's just no basis to make that argument tonight. There just isn't." On CNN, Rick Santorum, former senator, your friend, Rick very well. He called President Trump's words dangerous and shocking. Fox News, which is hardly a bastion of left-wing thinking, although I know you and the president have been pretty critical of them lately, they can't find any evidence to support fraud claims. The New York Post, which is perhaps the most pro-Trump print publication in the nation, right? In terms of like newspapers, this is one of their headlines. It says, "Downcast Trump makes baseless election fraud claims in White House address." I just saw one of the president's or a lawyer, Mr. Turley, saying, "Mr. President, stop saying these things. You're hurting your own case." So, I mean, I'm looking at this. This seems indefensible. And what really worries me is we have a system of politics that has served us well for nearly 2.5 centuries. And we have a president who, because he, at this point, seems to be losing, seems to be out to undermine the process. And Kevin, I again, I ask, you're okay with that? Because I think if President Obama was doing it, or Hillary Clinton was doing that, and she kind of did in 2016. Remember, I don't think she still hasn't accepted the election results.
Yeah, and there were and CNN wasn't outraged by that. The Washington Post wasn't outraged by that.
But we were outraged about that.
Nor any of the other.
You were outraged by that. I was outraged by that. So why wouldn't we be outraged when Trump seems to be doing the same thing?
Why is it, though? See, Rob, once again, Donald Trump's just supposed to roll over and take it and be the adult in the room after 4 years of this illegitimacy pushing on him.
Yes.
Why? Because he's a leader of the free world.
Yes.
And by the way, he's
he's a Republican, and we should elevate above some of this stuff. And he can be the same sharp-elbowed Trump that he wants without saying things that are demonstrably false, or hatching conspiracies while offering nothing. Like, if you have evidence of this, offer it. The president has lawyers and staffers and everything else at his disposal. Mm-hmm. Show us.
Sure. So how about this? How about tear down the paper that blocking the observers from looking in the windows at people who are counting these votes? How about honoring state law and allowing observers within 6 feet? How about how about just not changing state law by court rather than legislature to allow this voting to go on and dates to be changed and curing of ballots? All of those things. How about all of that? So is he frustrated? Sure. Does he speak in the demonstrative terms? Yes. This isn't a new thing, by the way. This is the president. This is why 65.5% of North Dakotans voted for him, Rob.
Yeah,
this is why. They did, because they like the fighter, because finally someone's fighting for us. Finally somebody's taking on China. Not instead of Joe Biden coming in, who says China's not a problem, they're not even a competitor.
Let me challenge that a little bit, though, because that is President Trump. Is that why North Dakotans voted for him, or did North Dakotans vote for him because the alternative is an administration where both the potential president and vice president, have said that they would ban fracking, which would be terrible for North Dakota's economy. I was just watching a national news reporter. He was already itemizing all the things that the Biden-Harris administration could begin overturning from the Trump administration. They're talking about, finally ending, the progress to build the Keystone Pipeline, redoing, rolling the methane rules back to Obama era. So these are all things that would be terrible for North Dakota. Yeah. And I think North Dakotans voted for Trump because the alternative is that. I don't know that people are voting for President Trump because of the way he's behaving. I think they're voting for him despite that, Kevin.
I think you should pay a little more attention, Rob, quite honestly. I think you need to get out a little more. My phone has been lighting up. Media around this state's phones have been lighting up. They want Fox News pulled from North Dakota. That's how upset people are.
Because Fox News reported things they don't like. I mean, is this where? Because that's what the left does, right? When they see every day, Kevin, my editors are contacted by left-wing people who want me fired. We're gonna start doing that now as conservatives.
So I love what the illustration you just made is what's frustrating people. Conservatives aren't activists. We say ballot harvesting is bad, right? What we ought to be doing is ballot harvesting. We say that ballot curing is bad. What we ought to be doing is ballot curing. Maybe that's what we ought to do, is fight fire with fire. They respond to things they don't like, elections they don't like, by smashing windows and burning up buildings and lighting cars on fire and looting stores, and we get a little bit vocal, and somehow we're the undignified ones. See, that's the people are frustrated. Speaking of those policies, and you're exactly right. That's the first thing. The most important thing is policy. That's why we do all of this stuff. But you can either have a president who's going to fight like hell for good policies, or you can have one that just accepts the outcomes. And we as Republicans, because we're conservatives, activism, is not natural to us. That's why the Tea Party was such an incredible movement, because for the first time in decades, conservatives got wrapped up and took the government to their own hands. Do I condone everything Donald Trump says? Of course not. Do I wish he'd do it differently? Lots of times. But I'm telling you, there are a lot more people that love the way he talks and the way he puts things than you might want to admit. And they don't even necessarily agree with it, but they're grateful. He's got this fight in him, this fire in him that's going to, and I think, by the way, he had to use every tool, every legal tool in the tool chest to until this is settled. But when it's settled, and it will be one day, if it's settled against Donald Trump, then I hope he would exit with dignity and integrity, because he will get to continue to lead a movement as a former president, probably with greater liberties than he's been able to do it as the president.
Well, there's that. It's funny because Kevin, you and I were both parts of the Tea Party movement here in North Dakota,
yes.
And it's funny to see how some of these things have diverged. And I understand. I mean, I look at the vote. I didn't vote for President Trump again. I can't bring myself to do that, and it's a hang up. And I know I tell people that, and they get frustrated with me, and they don't understand why I'm holding out. And I don't understand the appeal. We don't like it. We would not like it if Democrats behaved the way President Trump does and says the things he did. We would be apoplectic. I don't understand why we're so tolerant of it with President Trump. I'd like to get back to a point where decorum matters again, and I say that knowing full well of all the things that the left wingers say, and the Hollywood celebrity activists who are basically sort of Hollywood. I mean, we all know what that is, and the awful and terrible things that they say. But I'm just tired of this finger pointing. It's like, well, it's okay for us to behave terribly and say terrible things because all these other people are saying terrible things. At some point, yes, we should be the adults in the room. I've always kind of thought, in fact, I think years and years ago, I wrote a column. This is kind of Republicans' job, is to be the adults in the room and say, no, we can't afford that. We can't do that. And now we're kind of saying, well, no, we should just do what the liberals do, because then we'll win elections.
A long time ago, I was a 30-year-old chairman of the North Dakota Republican Party. And Democrats had 12 out of 15 statewide offices, including the congressional delegation. They'd had the governorship 28 out of the previous 32 years. They had a majority in the North Dakota Senate. We had a slight majority in the House of Representatives. And they ran vicious, hard-hitting attacks on, I remember Governor Olson, the 1 4-year term we did have, vicious attacks, used the tax department to violate his privacy and make up stories about, in concert with, by the way, with Forum News Service. Well, it wasn't Forum News Service at the time; it was the Grand Forks Herald, separate from Forum News Service. They were doing all these things, and I was this young, very aggressive state party chairman, and I decided we have to fight fire with fire. We can't sit around and let them take the low road, and we take the high road to defeat. There's no merit in finishing second place in the race for governor. And so, we played a lot tougher. Now, granted, the extremes are much greater today, Rob, but what you outline is, might sound nice and logical and all that, might get you invited to the Forum Christmas party.
Nobody invites me. Well, maybe I'm technically at a place. No, I don't know if it, because I get that accusation all the time that like Rob wants to be invited to cocktail parties. Kevin, I think at this point, I don't really want to be invited to anybody's cocktail party. I wouldn't probably show up if you invited me. I don't want that.
It's a great point. And I don't mean it personally, Rob, but I've never been a good club member, as you know. I've never been a good club member. When I was that young state party chairman all those years ago, I advocated for primary and to throw out our convention. I've got an AP story to prove it. Because I but I don't like club membership, and so I never have done the club thing very well. But it's also been very liberating for me as a member of Congress and senator, and to be my own person and sort of march to the drumbeat of the people more so than the parties. But all of that said, I don't want to argue vehemently with you necessarily about this, but I completely understand it. I completely understand the appeal. Again, I think I can speak the same language as Donald Trump without maybe being as offensive as he is. But I also know that people wanted a fighter. They got a fighter, and now they're ready to fight for him. I mean, there are people, I'm sure this won't surprise you. I've got a lot of people who want to give a lot of money for the first time in their lives to a recount fund, more than they've ever given to a candidate. That's how strongly people feel about it.
Yeah. People have felt strongly about a lot of bad leaders throughout history, and not even. I mean, we always break the Godwin's law. I'm not even talking about that, like not dictator, because I don't think President Trump's that. All the people, he's a Nazi or whatever. He is not.
Right.
But no. I don't think he's a good leader for our country. I don't think Joe Biden was a good leader for our country.
Well, first of all, a good leader for our country. He's rebuilt our military. He rebuilt our economy. He rolled back lots of regulations. He restored America's power in the world. He got NATO countries to finally pay more of their share of their own national defense. He pulled us out of troops out of wars in the Middle East that were going on far too long. That's pretty great leadership to me. And just because you don't like the way he talks about something, that's not the definition of leader either.
Yeah.
Because remember, Winston Churchill was a very eloquent, strong leader, and they
He
threw
was.
him out of office.
Yeah.
And so, mistake. But I will also say this, Rob. I think one of the miscalculations by our national media, and I don't know if you saw the Axios piece. I didn't even see it, but I did an interview with the guys from Axios on HBO about a month ago. And one of the things I told them, and I told Maggie Haberman this yesterday from the Times too, or maybe a couple of interviews ago, the media missed an opportunity with Donald Trump. They've never had access to a president of the United States like they've had with him. And instead of embracing that, understanding it, appreciating it to some degree, not that doesn't mean not being critical or asking probing questions, but they got hostile to the guy, and they've overstayed their welcome in the White House press room in many cases.
It's part of the problem is the national news media is not serving us well either. And I get back to not just the traditional news media, but social media, where we've landed on this idea that we need to hide things from people, right? We've got to protect the public from information, even if it's stupid information, even if it's stupid comments. A lot of people say stupid things. A lot of politicians say stupid things. We ought to hear that, right? Like, I don't know, we got to hide them because if we hear they're going to be infected with bad ideas, that is dangerous thinking. And I don't think the news media is doing, especially because our job in the news media is to show people things, right? This is a thing that happened. Right. Here's the information. Here's the video. Here's the sound. Here it is. Not, we have deemed this too dangerous for you to see. That's a terrible mistake, and it breaks my heart that they're making it. You want to talk about some state politics?
Sure, why not?
Should we talk about District 8? I
Might as well.
had somebody telling me that, and it was a longtime political observer involved in the news media and they were telling me that there's a fight going on to see whose political party it is, if it's Doug Burgum's party or if it's your party. Who's the North Dakota Republican Party belong to? I'm not sure I agree with that. But there are a lot of people out there. In fact, I don't agree with it. I shouldn't say I'm not sure. I'm certain. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's what's going on. I think what's going on is some personalities that don't like each other very much, but have a lot of influence. What are you seeing in District 8? What's happening?
Well, what's happening, I think, in this day is, first of all, I think it's such a peculiar circumstance, right? I mean, let's face it. This I don't know that this has happened before. If it has, it's been a long time. Where somebody died in office, and then won an election and didn't hold the office before they died. All these things are unique circumstances. But I do think it illustrates some problems, and I can make everybody mad here. So let's give it a whirl. The first thing it reveals is that the power of the Attorney General's opinions, I think, is too much power. I'm not saying he doesn't have it, but Attorney General opinions in North Dakota have always, both by tradition and I think by law, carried the weight of law until such time as they're overturned by a court or a legislature or something like that. And Wayne Stenjum, confronted with this vacancy, not in the office, but a vacancy in a candidacy, was confronted with a problem, and he ruled, as you know, that that the deceased person, David Ondal in this case, could stand the ballot. He had to stand the ballot. That if he's elected, that would trigger the vacancy in the office, and then the district party, in this case Republican Party, could fill that vacancy. That's his opinion, and that opinion is law until such time as it's overturned. I'm not sure. I've never really thought that should be the case. I don't know what the solution should be, what the remedy would be to that power that the Attorney General has, but I think he has it, and that's one issue. Then, of course, you have the governor weighing in now after the fact with this new ruling, or his position of appointing somebody to fill this seat, which, by the way, isn't vacant yet.
No, Jeff Delzer is still in office.
Yeah, that's right. But the biggest problem here isn't even the legal problem. That'll be sorted out, or whether the governor actually has the power to do what he's doing, or whether Wayne Stenjum has the power to do what he's doing. Let's not forget we have a Secretary of State who is the ultimate arbiter of who takes office and who doesn't. Yeah. He's the elections.
Al's just saying I'm going to do what Wayne's telling me to do. So.
Yep, and I don't blame him. Wayne's his lawyer, right? So if he certifies this, so you have this clash not only between the legislative branch and the executive branch. And I'm going to just say this out loud now that I've sort of irritated, Wayne Stenja maybe. The separation of powers, particularly between the executive branch and the legislative branch. Remember, I'm a legislator.
Yeah.
If a President Donald Trump or President Barack Obama or President Joe Biden felt like they could intervene in a congressional vacancy and appoint the replacement. I mean, we're so careful in the House of Representatives that our founders didn't even make a provision for any appointment. Not even a governor of a state could make that appointment because of the separation issues. So I just find that so foundational that I would have a very hard time if I was the governor. In fact, I wouldn't do it as a governor. I would not do what Doug Burgum did. I understand he did it. Maybe he's
got some authority to call. He's got some authority, and the problem is the situation is so complicated. And despite what our attorney general thinks, I don't think current law addresses it. Current law addresses a vacancy in the office, which hasn't occurred. We had a vacancy which occurred on the ballot, and then the voters elected that vacancy. And by the way, I don't want to. Dave Andal was a wonderful man, and it was terrible to lose him. And I wish we were talking about his election victory, because clearly the voters of District 8 wanted him. We have the vote in hand, and they wanted him in office. And it's a tragedy that he can't serve. And there's a human being there that we lost, and that's terrible. But getting back, I don't think that we don't have law that addresses this. And like it or not, the Constitution, the state Constitution, which trumps any statute, says clearly if we have a vacancy in any office and we don't have in other law or the Constitution a process for filling that vacancy, then the governor appoints. Now, maybe that should be changed, because I agree with you on the separation of powers issue. I don't really want the executive, although it's obviously this is a very unusual circumstance. It's not like this is something that's going to pop up every cycle, but I don't really want the executive branch appointing legislators either. But I look at the law, and I don't know what other conclusion you come to. The Constitution says the governor appoints. Okay, well, the governor's going to appoint.
I haven't read it, but does the Constitution say legislative or does it say any office?
It says any office.
I do think there's a and I think that may be in. Who knows what they were thinking.
There is another statute. There is statute. I think it's in chapter 44. There is statute that says the governor can appoint to any office except for the legislative assembly, but the Constitution says any office. So if it comes down to a contradiction there, the Constitution is the Constitution. Statute is statute.
Well, maybe so, except I think then you have to go back to a clear reading, or at least, speculation maybe is the best you can do, of what they were talking about when they said any office. It is impossible for me to think that anybody in history ever thought it was a good idea for a governor to appoint a legislator. Yeah. It is so foundational to our separation of powers, because the legislature is a political creature. It is not, unlike the judiciary, it is not an independent body. It is political, and it's meant to be political. Yeah. And so I do think that foundational, of all things, that foundational issue is so fundamental that I can't imagine that the writers of our Constitution thought that a governor should ever appoint. Now, that said, even if he has the technical authority because they left
should he is the question.
Should he? And I think that's even clearer. He should not, because what he's done is he's set up a royal battle with the policymaking branch of the government. Now, I'm speaking as a legislator, right? So that's why I view what's going on. I can't imagine the president trying to fill a vacancy on the United States Senate or in the United States House of Representatives. And that's basic. Here's the other thing. You have another fundamental violation. You have a violation with other unconstitutional offices. And the governor is not subordinate to the attorney general. The attorney general is not subordinate to the governor. The secretary of state is not subordinate. The state auditor is not subordinate. They are peers of the governor. The governor is elected by the very same people. So you have a conflict between two branches. You now have conflicts between the same branch, among the same branches. But at the end of all that, you have a district Republican Party who's left out of this. And I
think it was a mistake for Governor Burgum, because Lauren DeWitts is the chair in District 8, and he has said in multiple, he's been asked, and Governor Burgum didn't contact them first. And that's, even if he was going to go ahead with even if he was going to go ahead with the appointment, I think you have to make that phone call. Somebody has to call the district and say, at least say, hey, we're doing this. Or this is why we're doing this. Explain it at least, even if you're not going to agree. So I think that was a mistake. Right. When you're already going to be perceived as bigfooting the situation. My problem is I'm a big proponent of following the law. I mean, sometimes the law dictates outcomes we don't want. I think, the legislators are saying, sort of part of the problem here is that if the local district they're going to appoint Jeff Delzer. Governor Burgum doesn't like Jeff Delzer. So, they don't want that to happen. But a lot of people want Jeff Delzer in there. And it's not really about what we want. It's not really about it's what the law says. So really, I think the Democrats might have a very good argument here that, hey, the voters cast their ballots for somebody they knew was dead, who is again, per the Constitution, in order for a lawmaker to be qualified for office, they have to be a qualified elector on Election Day. And even though we have early voting now, Election Day is still defined in the law, right? I mean, we use Election Day for the timing for when we print ballots and everything like that. I mean, that's pretty well established. I have a hard time seeing that they elected somebody who's not qualified to take the office, and so the Democrats can argue, well, our third place. Now, again, that's not an outcome I want. The candidate in that office got thousands less votes than I think she got 12% of the total vote. And granted, it's a 4-way race, but 12% of the total vote in that district, and she's going to be representing District 8 until the next general. Or for 4 years. I mean, that would be that's not a just outcome either. So I don't know that there's a good situation. I wish there was a way to hold a special election before the legislature seated in January, but I don't think we can fit that in either, because you have to the law dictates we got to go through the whole process. We got to hold conventions and all of that. And I think there's also a law that they can't do it until we can't do it this close to a legislative session anyway. I think we have to wait. I think the law says we have to wait till after this session anyway. So I don't even think that's a possibility.
Well, the people of District 8 deserve representation. And so that's, in my mind, that is first and foremost. And so you have to settle that. But I do think what you've illustrated, what I've illustrated, is that I don't think the law is as clear. But the good news is there's a system for that too. We do have courts, and courts can hear the arguments from the governor and his attorneys. They can hear the arguments from the Secretary of State and the Attorney General. I would say this, and I sued, as you maybe know, when I was state party chairman, I sued Governor Sinner, by the way, jointly with the Secretary of State at the time, who was a Democrat, and Jim Kusler. We sued him over an election date, a special election date, after the death of Quentin Burdick, when you might recall that Senator Kent Conrad ran for that open seat while he was a sitting senator, and the governor tried to call the election a special election this day of the general election, even though it didn't meet the required number of days in the statute. We prevailed. The Republican Party chairman and the Democratic Secretary of State prevailed against the governor in the Supreme Court in North Dakota. My point being, the courts generally, as you know, and rightfully so, back to the separation issues, they don't want to intervene in political issues and election issues. But in a case like this, there's no other remedy. And so what are they going to do? I have no idea. Again, if the legal part is really clear, the constitutional part is really clear, that'll make it easy for them. I don't think it's that clear, but I'm not a lawyer. And if they don't think it's clear, I'm not betting on anything. Or my only guess would be they may be inclined to remand back to this Secretary of State, who is the elections officer. And there's this whole issue, both in federal and state law and administrative law, of the courts remanding back to regulatory agencies. And in this case, the regulatory agency is the Secretary of State. That's often the case. Maybe that would happen. I have no idea, but I do know this. I don't think it's as crystal clear as probably a lot of us would think. Now, I've just argued on both sides of the issue, which demonstrates how unclear it is. I just know, politically speaking, I have a feeling that our governor, who I like a great deal, is in for a very, very difficult legislative session. And it was
he was in for that regardless of what was going to happen in District 8. So at this point, he may just be. It's going to be bad anyway. I don't know. I don't want to put. I can't speak for his thinking.
I can't either. But I do think a healing opportunity was missed. and that's what I think is probably as great a tragedy as anything. There was a healing opportunity for all of our leaders to get together and say, how do we do this? What's the best way to do this? What does the district want? And maybe Doug Burgum could have said, this would be a good time for us to talk to Jeff Delzer and see, if we can work something out with him. But clearly that wasn't what he wanted to do. And he's exercised his authority as he sees it. The Attorney General and the Secretary of State are exercising their authority, and a court's going to have to decide.
Do you?
Yeah.
Well, the courts are going to have to decide for sure. And what's interesting is they actually ruled on something related. I mean, we had the Democrats put forward an insurance commissioner candidate who had voted in Nevada.
Yeah, right.
Into that, right? So we went through all that, and then what's interesting? Her initial case was not, but then the Democrats came back and they said, well, a vacancy's occurred. We want to replace her on the ballot. And the court said no to that too. And basically they said, well, a vacancy can't occur because vacancy can't be created by somebody who was never qualified in the first place, right? And that's kind of the situation we're in with Andal, I think. But I don't know. The courts will take a look at this, and really, if we could just hold another election, and I hope it's not Jeff, because remember the voters rejected Jeff Delzer too. He was on the primary ballot.
Yes,
they said no, we don't want him.
Exactly right.
So it's time to
You're right.
It's time to I wish there was a way to hold another vote. I'm just not sure there is.
I'm not sure there is either. But I want to address for a minute though the contention, the rumor you picked up that it's a battle between Doug Burgum and Kevin Cramer about whose party it is.
Right.
I'll be honest. I never look at the Republican Party in North Dakota and say, "Geez, is this my party?"
It's funny. It's funny that they say that about with District 8 in context, because I'm pretty sure you were cutting ads for Governor Burgum for his preferred candidates. I mean, not that you were doing anything on his, but you guys were kind of together supporting the same candidates there anyway.
Yeah, right. That's right. No, that's exactly right. And the party structure in North Dakota, again, I'm the guy that went to the primary. I'm the guy that busted up the party club, and then Doug Burgum followed me in that that move. So we're really more alike when it comes to sort of the party itself and the structure. I don't think either one of us has ever really gone after party structure so much as the heart of the people who make up the party. And that's, to me, political parties are like churches. They're not buildings. They're not hierarchy. They're people.
Sure.
They're people, and that's that's the approach I've always taken. I think that's the approach Doug has taken, and so I think it is interesting that people think it's a fight for the party itself. It's really not.
Well, Kevin, and we're watching this play out nationally. I hope. Is there a point at which you, and I know you hate talking about this or going back to it, but I just think it's so important that we talk candidly about this, because I'll tell you one thing, I am very tired of just sort of the knee jerk, it's not supposed to be like, it's one thing like Packers and Vikings fans, throwing tomatoes at each other. I mean, that's fine. This is about governing, right? This is about making law, which is kind of why I want to try to elevate things. Is there a point at which if Mr. Trump doesn't accept the results that you would break with him, that you would say, no, Mr. Trump, I'm sorry, you're wrong?
Well, I think there's that question, and if will I ever just say you're wrong, you have to go away, even though this was an illegal election or an illegitimate election? I suppose at some point we have to have a president, even if it's an illegitimate president, because our republic requires that. And there's always another election, and there'll be a midterm election, and there'll be long-term ramifications, even in a post-Trump era. There's a point where losing becomes winning for the greater good. So you can put it that way. On the other hand, if in fact all of the legal avenues are exhausted, and he still comes up, short of winning, absolutely. But what I don't like to do, Rob, is prepare for defeat. And remember, people were asking me, reporters were asking him, are you prepared to accept the results if you lose?
Yeah, I thought that was unfair.
The election was held. That's stupid.
Early on in my career, I think I asked a candidate that, and someone pointed out, it's really not. Candidates always expect to win. I mean, why shouldn't they? They're on the ballot. They think they have the right ideas. I mean, you're asking them, well, what are you going to do if you're going to lose? I don't know that that's always a very fair question, or to get hung up on the answer. There's no good way for a candidate to answer that question. So I I agree.
Well,
I agree with you there. I worry though.
Only losers prepare to lose.
Right.
Only losers prepare to lose.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I always thought that, somebody said, well, I don't even write a concession speech. If I have to do that, I'll wing it. But I'm planning to win,
sure.
which I get. I understand that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one last point. I worry about this thing that we're doing where we're just questioning everybody's legitimacy. I mean, at some point, because the Democrats did that to Trump, and I thought that was terrible. We've talked about that. It was terrible. He was the president. He gets to govern.
Bogus impeachment.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't think Republicans should do that to Joe Biden. I think if Joe Biden, he's the president. Now, I obviously oppose his policies, vote against his policies, and use all the political levers we have there. But he's the president, and he's a legitimate president, and we should carry. I think it's dangerous if we're going to go into an era where it's just neither side is willing to accept that the other side gets to govern sometimes. That's a dangerous place for our country to be. Don't you agree?
Well, sure, but it's not less dangerous than only doing it when a Republican wins. In other words, only condoning it when a Republican wins. That's the part of the fight that conservatives are upset about. Look at the Supreme Court. Can you remember Robert Bork? Do you remember Clarence Thomas? Do you remember Amy Coney Barrett and all the ones in between?
Brett Kavanaugh? I remember.
Name one time when Republicans used partisan politics to bash a qualified, albeit very liberal, Supreme Court nominee, like, say, Sonia Sotomayor or
Elena Kagan or
Justice Elena Kagan, or on and on it goes. We don't do that sort of thing. Well, guess what? I'm afraid after this most recent battle, that might even be over. It may be that we will only have Supreme Court justices that are appointed by a president of the same party as a majority of the Senate, even if it's 51 to 49 majority. We may be at that point. I'm kind of worried about that. And so for decades, Republicans have always said, no, we may not like that person. We may not like her politics. She may be very liberal. She may want to rip up the Constitution, but she's qualified because she went to the right law school. Therefore, we're going to support her. Even, we're getting much, much, much more divided. So how does it end? I think your point is right. Adults have to step up, but the adults have to be from both parties. The adults are going to have to be from both parties. We can't just be every couple of cycles Republicans win, therefore the adults are in charge.
Well, it's hard. It's almost like an arms race, and it's hard for one side to just unilaterally disarm, right? Like, well, okay, we're going to be,
that's exactly right.
We at some point it's like we got to come together and just say, listen, saying awful things about one another is not getting us anywhere.
Well, and people should know, Rob. People should know. I have a lot of good Democratic friends in the Senate, and I'm a friend of a lot of theirs. In fact, I had a wonderful call this morning with one of my very best friends from the House of Representatives, Congressman David Scott, member of the Congressional Black Caucus, who now by seniority is in line to be the next chairman of the House Ag Committee. I called to congratulate him, tell him how proud I was of him, tell him how much I love him. He told me what a major role I've played in his success, working with him on getting money for traditional black colleges, historical black colleges.
And we need that relationship. He's going to be chairing a committee that's hugely consequential for one of North Dakota's most important industries.
That's right. But all of that said, now these are important. There are a lot of these things that go on that you're not going to hear about on the media. Well, what are we going to do if Hunter Biden's laptop demonstrates that the current president-elect of the United States, or the president of the United States, actually did get paid off by China and Russia and Ukraine and other places, while his son fronted for him as a board member of various companies? What are we going to do? Are we going to, because we're Republicans and he's duly elected, we're going to say, yeah, but gee, that's dear old Joe and we're the adults in the room. He is the duly elected president, therefore we shouldn't do anything about it. Are people going to demand that of us because he's a Democrat? I probably wouldn't want to impeach him, because God help us if Kamala Harris ever becomes president.
And that's part of the problem that the news media has gotten themselves into as well, because they decided, and social media, they decided, well, that story, they decided at the very beginning, the New York Post drops the story, and they just started immediately, oh, it's conspiracy, it's Russia, it's whatever, it's Chinese propaganda, it's whatever it is. They've already dismissed it. But if the story builds more substance, it's like they've already now they all got to climb back down, and they're not going to do that.
That's right.
They're just not going to do that. They say, "Oh, well, we were wrong. It actually is a story." They're not going to do that, and that's again.
No.
Twitter's killing us.
But
We gotta go. You know we gotta keep off Twitter is journalists.
Start your version. I'm laying it on you, Rob.
Start my version of Twitter. I'm not.
Platforms. Huh? Are you good enough to do that?
I'm not smart enough. I'm not smart enough to code something like that.
But you and I do agree on this. The only way to shut some of this out, first of all, we do have to take away. We have to take away the immunity protections that these media platforms have, social media platforms.
You know, I used to disagree with that vehemently because I run a blog with comments, and I don't necessarily want to be legally liable for every comment that's posted on there. But on the other hand,
but you don't edit them.
If they're exercising editorial control and they're saying, well, this story is where that's what we do at the newspapers, right? And there should be some editorial control. Not every story is a story. Not every person who sends in a hot tip. It's because I get them all the time where people are sending me stuff. Oh, look at this! It's a conspiracy, and the school board's doing this and that. And it's like, well, I don't think so. But you're free to start your own blog if you want and have at it.
Right. And that's to my point. Once we take away the political or the government advantages and privileges that these companies like Twitter and Facebook and Google and all the rest have. Then it's up to the marketplace to work this stuff out. And you and I have always agreed on that. If you don't like the mousetrap, build a new mousetrap. And I know that it's tough, but once we knock down the barriers to entry, and I do think that's legitimate. And there are antitrust issues and whatnot, but we can work through those. But in the meantime, if you got $1 billion and you want to start your own, news network, or you got $1 billion or even $1 million and you want to start your own media platform, social media platform, get after it and let's go get some. Let's go get some subscribers and advertisers and maybe knock Twitter off its perch. Who knows?
And Facebook, by the way. And I should say, I wrote a column about this. You don't have to use Facebook and Twitter to get your feed. I don't read. I feel like I'm pretty plugged in. I don't read Facebook or Twitter. I post there because, I want people there to read my stuff, but I don't read. I get my news through RSS feeds where I can actually pick the news sources that I want to read or follow the people that I want to follow. And I don't have to depend on algorithms or anything else that Facebook or Twitter's doing. It's just a straight up feed where it's like I get emails when people post and I just read them. And that's how I want to get my news. So anyway, we could solve all. Kevin, thanks for your time as always. I guess we're going to continue to see how things play out, and I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about next time you're on as well.
Well, it's much longer blog than we've had for a while, but we haven't had it for a while, so
for sure.
This is a good podcast. Good one.
Well, Kevin, thanks for your time.